Chapter 7. If we can't be friends, disagreement is something normal. Dalai Lama. For years, I didn't like Oprah Winfrey. She's not the type of person, tough, smart, and powerful, you'd want to have an issue with. But I felt the type of way about the things she said about hip-hop music in the past. It seemed like every time Oprah would go off about how hip-hop was misogynistic and ruining America's youth, she was talking about the same things on my album. What actually bothered me was being kept off her show. I wanted to be on it. Oprah was where A-listers would go to promote their project, sell books, move albums, hype movies. I considered myself an A-lister, so how does that look that I'm not there too? I felt I had to explain my absence to my audience. So, as I tend to do, I kept it real about the situation. I did a few interviews where I said the reason Oprah wouldn't have me on her couch is because she's a reflection of her audience, which is made up of middle-aged white women. That audience finds me scary, so it would figure Oprah wouldn't be into me either. I also named one of my dogs after her, which I admit was a little bit much. After I made those comments, I didn't spend a lot of time worrying about how Oprah would take them. She'd already made it clear I wasn't coming on her show, so why would I care about upsetting her? She had her business to run. For the record, I think she should have kept her afternoon TV show after she started OWN, and I had mine. Then one night I was at a fundraiser in New York City for the NYRP, a nonprofit founded by Bette Midler. It's a fantastic organization that sponsors a lot of renewal programs for parks and neglected areas in New York City. It wasn't my normal crowd, a lot of older white people in tuxedos. But I love Bette and respect the cause, so I bought a table. At one point in the evening, I bumped into Gayle King, Oprah's best friend. Now, Gayle is a real deal, a very sophisticated, secure, and smart lady. She's never afraid of a situation, as she showed with her R. Kelly interview. So she marched right up to me and basically said, "Why are you talking shit about my girl?" I had to explain to Gayle that I didn't have a true beef with Oprah. "Listen, I'd love to be Oprah's friend," I continued, "but if we can't be friends, can we at least be enemies?" When I said that, I saw Gayle arch her eyebrows and look at me a bit different. It registered to her that while I might have been talking trash about her friend, there was a method to what I was doing. "Okay, you're different than I thought," Gayle told me. "I'm going to tell Oprah she needs to meet you. You two need to talk." True to her word, Gayle set it up for me to be on Oprah's show. It was a great episode. She came to my old house in Queens, met my grandmother, and walked around my old neighborhood with me. Eventually, we got to our relationship. "Did you say things to be proactive?" she asked, "or did you just not like me?" I replied with a smile. "I would see moments when you discuss your feelings on the culture, rap culture, and everything that was wrong with the culture was on my CD. And I was like, she doesn't like me." "You talking about the N-word?" asked Oprah. "Misogyny?" "All of those things. Views against women, violence, things like that," Oprah replied, not backing down. "Just those little things," I said, laughing. In that moment, I'm thinking, she don't like me because there's so many different impressions. And not to say those things were wrong, but it made me say, if I can't be a friend, at least let me be an enemy, so I can coexist. I said before adding, I just use it as a strategy. "Oh, that's interesting," said Oprah, looking at one of her producers off camera. The reason Gayle and Oprah were so intrigued by that phrase was because it shattered their preconceived notion about me. Before meeting me, they had bought into the 50 Cent persona, that this was someone who got into beefs or drama because he couldn't help himself. But when I said, "at least let me be your enemy," they understood that when I got into a beef, it was never driven by emotion. Instead, I was moving off a strategy. My strategy was pretty straightforward. I'd always prefer to be friends with someone, but if they're not interested, then I consider being enemies the next best option. Why? Because if you hate me, you're more likely to talk about me. If you feel passionate about me in a negative way, at some point you'll probably say to your friend, "Man, I can't stand 50 Cent. Your friend is going to ask you why. And just like that, I've become the subject of a conversation. That's all I'm asking for. Now I've got a foot in the door. Maybe after hearing about me, your friend won't feel quite as negative. Maybe they'll think, this guy sounds kind of interesting. I'll check out his music or watch Power. Maybe that's even how you got to this book in the first place, through a friend. That conversation would never have taken place if you felt neutral about me. No one asked their friends if they listened to a song they felt neutral about. No one mentions a writer or a designer that doesn't elicit a strong reaction in them. We only bring up things we love or things we hate. I'd always prefer to love, but if I can't get that, I'll take the hate. There's always a chance I can turn that hate into something positive. The ancient Greeks believed in a concept called agon, which roughly translates as an idea of people coming together for the purpose of contest or competition. To the Greeks, the most basic energy in the world was a battle between two forces. A debate was a fight between two people over an idea. Exercise is a fight between energy and fatigue. Study is a fight between you and the material. Every day is a fight between light and darkness. The Greeks didn't shy away from those fights. They believed the competition in any form was beneficial. Their most famous example of putting that belief into action was the organized athletic competition they created, which today we know as the Olympics. The Greeks valued the Olympics so much that they would actually stop battles in the middle of fighting so that contestants can walk through unharmed to make it to the games on time. Today, the Olympics give out silver and bronze medals to contestants who don't win. The ancient Greeks didn't believe in participation trophies. Each competition had only one winner. The victor went back to his village a hero, and everyone else went home a loser. The ancient Greeks' attitude towards competition reminds me of hip-hop culture today. Since day one, every rapper who picked up the mic has wanted to be acknowledged as the best who ever did it. No rapper is competing for a silver or a bronze medal. Every single one of us got into the game to take home the gold. That mindset was born in hip-hop's roots in the street. That dynamic, for better or worse, keeps the culture youthful. Unless you can keep your grip on the throne, it's out with the old and in with the new. Because of my upbringing, I'm extremely comfortable with the concept of competition. I don't care if it's music, TV, clothes, liquor, or sneakers. If I'm looking to get into a space that someone else is already occupying, watch how fast I turn it into a competition. Some people shy or even run away from challenge, but I always stroll confidently towards it. It's a sensibility that's earned me a reputation as a bully in the minds of many. I rarely dispute the title, but it's an oversimplification. I don't wake up in the morning looking to pick fights with people. I don't celebrate conflict. Again, I'd rather be friends. But if someone says they want a problem with me, I'll respond, no problem, because it's never a problem for me to compete. Competition brings out the best. Ever since he was a teenager growing up in Italy, Enzo Ferrari had a passion for car racing. In 1922, at the age of 20, he began working as a test driver in Milan and later joined Alfa Romeo as a driver. He spent a few years on the racing circuit, but retired after the birth of his son. Race car driving was dangerous business back then, and he decided that instead of risking his life every week, he would focus on the development side of the car business. In 1940, he founded his own manufacturing company, Ferrari, which would go on to become one of the best-known and respected brands in the world. Around the same time, another Italian car enthusiast, Ferruccio Lamborghini, was establishing a manufacturing business. But unlike Ferrari, Lamborghini was making tractors, not race cars. He enjoyed racing, but his larger passion was focused on the inner working of machines. After purchasing a Ferrari himself, Lamborghini recognized a number of flaws in the design. The cars were too noisy and had a notoriously touchy clutch, which had to be repaired. When he took his car in to have the Ferrari mechanics fix it, they wouldn't let him personally observe their repairs, which pissed him off. Since Ferraris were already considered the best luxury sports cars on the market, Lamborghini saw these flaws as inexcusable. He decided to bring his critiques to Enzo Ferrari himself. Ferrari was deeply insulted that this tractor mechanic thought he could teach him something about race cars and rejected the advice. The moment created a deep-seated rivalry between the two. Stung by Ferrari's snub, Lamborghini decided he'd turn his interest in cars into a professional pursuit. He wasn't playing around. And 4 months later, the Lamborghini 350 GTV debuted at the Turin Motor Show. Enzo Ferrari had a head start over Lamborghini in this budding rivalry. He had already been in the business for a number of years, was older, and had far more racing miles under his belt. Not to mention he had already made a ton of money. Lamborghini, on the other hand, had technical know-how on the inner workings of cars, an insight that Ferrari's founder lacked. It was said that Lamborghini's office building was intentionally built next to their manufacturer's facility, which allowed him to take a quick trip to the factory and work on cars in person when a problem arose. He had a willingness to get his hands dirty, literally, to see his dream shine. As competitive rivals, Lamborghini and Ferrari would bring out the best in each other's work. Ferrari was never too interested in making street cars, as his passion lay in racing. Lamborghini was more focused on practicality and everyday use. If he hadn't been pushing the market in that direction, Ferrari might have never come off the racetrack and onto the street. The sense of competition forced both companies to evolve into stronger, more versatile versions of themselves. As it said, iron sharpens iron. The results of that competition were innovation and the building of dynasties. Ferrari and Lamborghini could have been friends, but a peaceful and gentle first meeting may never have inspired the creation of some of the best cars in the world. I've personally been a supporter of both brands over the years. I had a few Ferraris and a few Lambos too. And while both are incredible cars, I've got to crown Lambo the winner of this particular competition. A couple of years ago, I bought a beautiful Ferrari 488. The dealer told me the car had to be plugged into an outlet in the wall in my garage when it wasn't running, so the battery would charge. I followed the directions, but every time I tried to start it up, nothing happened. The car looked great, but what am I really doing with a car that won't drive anywhere? That thing was a lemon, so I had to go back. Ferruccio Lamborghini wasn't lying back in the day. Those Ferraris don't always run right. Lamborghini and Ferrari used their competition to push themselves to heights neither of them ever dreamed of when starting out. Forget about just being successful companies. 100 years later, each of their last names have become synonymous with quality and luxury. That's making an impact. I really believe that the better your opponent is, the better you become. It was true in the luxury auto business, and it's true in almost every field. It's certainly at the front of my mind whenever I start working on a new project. Take music. Whenever I'm about to hit the studio, I try to think about all the great musical moments I've experienced from different artists. I say great moments because I don't necessarily have a favorite artist, but I do have favorite moments. Usually it's a song that jumps out at me and captures a feeling I find inspiring. Black Rob's Whoa was like that to me. I can't say Rob was one of my favorite artists across the board, but for the 4 minutes and 7 seconds that record was playing, no one else was better than me. Same way with Boogie Down Productions' The Bridge Is Over. Even though KRS-One was dissing Queens, his aggression was so contagious that I loved that song. Listening to it even 35 years later puts me in an aggressive and confident mood. When I'm trying to get in the zone creatively, I'll catalog 10 of those moments in my head. It doesn't even have to be a complete song. It could just be a great hook or a catchy chorus. I'll collect all those moments and label them my creative competition. The entire time I'm recording, I refer back to those moments. If I'm listening to a verse I just laid down, I'll ask myself, was it as fire as Whoa? If the answer is no, then I need to go back in the booth and give it another shot. The same thing with each chorus and hook I compose. I compare it to those great moments I've cataloged. If I feel like it's falling short, I'll go back and do it again. I keep holding up what I've done against those moments I've cataloged and ask myself, is it good enough? Now, is every song I record going to be a classic like Whoa or The Bridge Is Over? Of course not. But by forcing myself to measure up against a song like that, I bring out the best in myself. It's like the old saying, shoot for the moon. Even if you miss it, you will land among the stars. But in order to push yourself to be great that way, the first thing you have to be able to do is to appreciate the greatness in others. You cannot go around believing no one is as good as you, and therefore you don't have anyone to measure up against. That's bullshit. No matter what you do or what you feel, there's someone else great in it too. So instead of believing your own hype, identify that individual and make them your competition. People like to say I'm a hater, but nothing could be further from the truth. What I am is an appreciator. I'm always appreciating what other people are doing. Competing is not hating. It's actually putting appreciation into action. You must be an appreciator no matter what you do. Let's say you're a novelist. Identify whoever the writer is you think is the best and measure whatever you write against them. If you're an architect, walk around your city and measure yourself against the most beautiful buildings you see. You need to stare at those buildings and say, you know what? That staircase was really fucking good. And then store it away in your mind. And if you really think your work is nicer than anything you see, compare yourself to whoever built the Eiffel Tower or the Taj Mahal. No matter how confident you are in your own abilities, there's still someone out there for you to compete against. Never think you're above competition. One way I see people fall into this trap is by listening to the individuals around them. This happens with rappers all the time. A guy will get in the booth and spit a verse, and one of his homies will say, "Yo, that was a hot line." Bam, that's all it takes. Now in the rapper's mind, he's already the greatest of all time. His friends will go on to tell him he's better than whatever SoundCloud young boy is hot at the moment. The rapper will eat it up and grow even cockier. But notice what his homies are not saying. That he's better than Jay, that he's better than Kendrick, that he's better than me. Those are the standards that you need to hold yourself up against before you start thinking you're the GOAT. If you only compare yourself to inferior opponents, you'll feel like you're doing something when you're really not doing much at all. This is why a lot of rappers challenge me prematurely. Their friends make them think they're ready when they haven't achieved anywhere near what I have. That's fine with me. I just have to knock them back down to size a bit. No matter what you've accomplished, you're never done competing. I've sold over 30 million records, but every time I step into the booth, I know I'm about to be measured up. Not against anyone else either. Against myself. Whenever I put a new song out, people are going to say, "That's cool, but it's not like when you first did it." I used to get frustrated with that response, but now I accept it. I'm not going to get another chance to make a first impression. Until I put down the mic for the final time, I'm going to be locked in a rivalry with myself. That doesn't frustrate me anymore. I'm dope. Why would I be mad at the comparisons? Now I need to just go out and beat myself. The Bearsville Boot Camp. Roughly 2 hours from New York City, just outside of the town of Woodstock, near the home of the famous music festival of the same name, you'll find the Bearsville Studios. The recording studio, which kind of reminds me of a barn, was founded in 1969 by Albert Grossman, a legendary music industry promoter. Grossman is best known for once being Bob Dylan's manager, as well as the man who guided the career of Janis Joplin and folk stars like Peter, Paul, and Mary. Grossman's dream was to build a studio in a rustic setting close to New York City, where rock artists could escape the noise and distractions of the city. For many years, the studio was considered one of the finest rock and roll music recording spaces in the country. In 2000, Grossman was long gone, though his wife Sandy still ran the place. But he and Dylan were replaced by another type of artist, New York City rappers. Responding to the same impulse that had motivated Grossman over 30 years earlier, the hip-hop production team, the Trackmasters, had decided to rent Bearsville out for 3 months. The duo, comprised of producers Tone and Poke, took over the studios, and then invited a mixture of established and unknown rappers and producers to travel up to Woodstock and record with them. There wouldn't be any clubs to go to or entourages hanging around. It was basically a hip-hop boot camp where the only agenda was music, and more music. Here's how I wound up there with them. One day I saw Corey Rooney, a producer and songwriter for Sony, and Marky D from the Fat Boys at my neighborhood barbershop. I had just finished the demo tape, so I asked Corey if I could play it for them. Corey said okay, then led us to his black convertible 500 SL Benz parked out front, and we all piled into the car to listen. A couple of seconds into the first song, Corey's phone rang and he picked it up. I didn't like that. He kept talking through the second song. Meanwhile, Marky seemed disinterested. After a few more songs, Corey turned to Marky and said, "I don't know. What you think, man?" "It's cool," Marky replied, but I'd already seen enough. I knew I was a nobody to them, but I wasn't going to sit there and be disrespected. "Give me my take back," I growled, popping the demo out of the stereo. "Y'all old school." I grabbed my tape and jumped out of the ride. It was a pretty brash, some might say stupid way to treat two industry veterans. I figured I'd never hear from them again. Then a few days later, I got word that they were looking for me. It turns out Corey had been listening. Guess he was a good multitasker after all, and had passed along the tape to Tone and Poke. They'd liked what they heard, Corey told me over the phone, and wanted me to come upstate to work on some music with them. I was excited they liked my music, but it also sounded like a setup. I just insulted these two, and now they wanted me to take a ride upstate with them? Seemed like a trip I might never come back from. I was torn. My street instincts were on high alert, But Tone and Polk were respected producers who had had a string of hits with Nas, Will Smith, and R. Kelly. I really wanted to work with them. I invited Corey and Marky to come back by the barbershop so I could take their temperature before committing to anything. When they pulled up, they didn't seem pissed. In fact, they seemed really eager for me to come upstate with them. My instincts told me I'd be safe. I packed a small bag and took off with them that very afternoon. I ended up staying in Bearsville for 18 days. Albert Grossman might have envisioned the studio as a retreat, but my time there was one of the most competitive and creative periods of my life. I arrived at Bearsville as an MC whose reputation barely extended past my neighborhood. Suddenly, I found myself surrounded by some real industry heavy hitters, not just Tone and Polk, but established producers like LES, Al West, and Kurt Gowdy as well. Pros who really knew their way around the studio and made beats to the highest standard. There were also rappers there like Nori, Slick Rick, and later Nas, who were already very established in the culture. It would have been very easy, even understandable, for me to be intimidated by the environment at Bearsville. I was far away from home in some studio out in the middle of the woods. Most of the other artists there were way ahead of me in terms of success. A lot of rappers in my situation would have looked around, gotten unnerved, and taken the first bus home, fled back to the safety of their neighborhood, instead of subjecting themselves to the intensity of being locked in a building with their competition for 2 weeks. I wasn't going anywhere. Bearsville was like heaven to me. I loved that we were in the middle of nowhere and there was nothing else to focus on except the music. I was completely locked in. I wasn't the most polished rapper there or the best lyricist, but I was determined no one there was going to outwork me. Other guys might start their day hungover or sitting in their room getting high, but I didn't hear those sorts of distractions. Once I woke up, the only thing I was doing was going for a jog in the woods. Then it was time to hit the studio. I'd usually be the first one there. Once checked in, I'd go from room to room, asking each producer to let me hear the latest beat they were working on. Once I'd listened to it a couple times, I'd go sit down in the corner somewhere and try to write a verse for it. Once I finished, I'd go back to the studio and ask the producer if I could record what I came up with. It was a very tough crowd to impress, but I was determined to stand out. I wanted to hear someone say, "Nah, he's got some shit," every time I finished the verse. I was a total beast day in and day out. It got to the point that I had spit verses on every track Tone and Polk came up with, and I still wanted more. I ended up rhyming over unfinished tracks, basically just drums, because my creative juices were flowing so strongly and I was overflowing with material. I recorded over 36 songs in Bearsville, many of which would go on to appear on Power of the Dollar. I'd come into the boot camp a relative unknown, confident in my ability, but also unsure about where I stood as an MC. After those 18 days, I knew damn sure that I belonged. It is extremely powerful to meet your competition head on and walk away from the confrontation knowing you have what it takes. That confidence stays with you for a long time. My time in Bearsville left me with more than enough material for what was supposed to be my debut on Columbia. We submitted the music and the label gave me a release date. I started preparing for what I knew was going to be a major launch. But as the release date started getting closer and closer, it became clear to me that I was the only one doing any real preparations. Columbia didn't really understand me as an artist. I could see that they were just going to throw the album out there and hope that something was just going to pop. If it did, great. If it didn't, I'd just be gone. That might have been the way they did things, but it wasn't an acceptable approach to me. I'd thrown everything I had into the time in Bearsville, and I knew I had the right material. My entire life was riding on the album being a hit. If you're just going to throw me up against the wall and hope I stick, then I'm going to turn into your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. I didn't have a plan B for my album not working, so I started looking around for a way to make myself a priority. I was going to create my own glue. At the time, hip-hop was in a cautious state because of the recent deaths of Biggie and Tupac. Everyone was afraid of a new war popping off, and it became taboo to mention another rapper's name in your song. If people did take shots at each other, there were subtle ones that only a hardcore fan would catch. For instance, when Nas wanted to diss Jay-Z, he didn't do it by name at first. Instead, he rhymed something like, 20G bets I'm winning them, threats I'm sending them, Lex 3 TV sets the minimum, ill sex adrenaline, party with villains. To the outside world, it didn't sound like anything. But those of us in the culture knew that Jay-Z rode around in a Lexus with 3 TV sets. So that was a subliminal shot at Jay. Nas might have been subtle in his attacks, but in the void created by the unspoken truce amongst rappers, I saw a golden opportunity. I hadn't signed any truce. There weren't any rappers out there who had value to me as a friend. But as enemies, well, that was a different story. I knew if someone had the confidence to come out of the shadows and re-embrace hip-hop's tradition of firing direct shots, the buzz would be deafening. I decided to be that person. How to Rob wasn't intended to just diss one person. It was a diss to the entire industry. It was as if I was saying, if none of y'all want to be my friend, then we're all going to be enemies. I let almost everyone have it. Jay-Z, Wu-Tang, Big Pun, Missy Elliott, Will Smith, Jada Pinkett, Slick Rick, DMX, Bobby Brown, and Whitney Houston all got called out by name. In order to signal that I was only interested in competition, not hostility, we threw in the line, I've been scheming on Tone and Poke since they found me, directed against the Trackmasters too, just to show that even my guys weren't above being dissed. Then we added the mad rapper in the chorus, saying this ain't serious, being broke can make you delirious, to bring a little levity to the situation. Even with those disclaimers, the record created an uproar the moment it dropped on Hot 97, New York City's premier radio station at the time. Most of those artists weren't prepared for someone saying their name in a song. Throughout the culture, everyone was asking, whoa, who is this new guy? Because he's saying everyone's name and don't care about nothing. Some of the biggest ones, including Jay-Z, Big Pun, and Wu-Tang, had responses for me, which was exactly what I hoped for. I needed something that was going to create attention around me, and How to Rob got me noticed immediately. Columbia snatched up the song and put it on the In Too Deep soundtrack, which exposed me to a wider audience. Everything was going according to my plan. But then I got shot, which essentially derailed everything I put into motion. It would end up taking a few more years to experience the hit debut I'd worked so hard for. But I still learned a valuable lesson with How to Rob. People always respond to a competitor. When you're viewed as someone who's going to run into the fray, as opposed to running from it, you'll always have eyes on you. Whether it's rap, sports, politics, media, or business, there's always going to be an audience for someone who isn't afraid to mix it up with their rivals. All you have to do to capitalize on that appetite for action is keep your emotions out of the process. I didn't have a problem with most of the artists I mentioned in that song. I respected the hell out of guys like Jay, Pun, and Raekwon, but being respectful wasn't going to put me in the position I needed to be in to realize my dreams. I had to demonstrate my competitiveness to make the industry take notice of me. So that's exactly what I did. They haven't stopped paying attention to me since. Curtis versus graduation. If How to Rob announced my competitive streak to hip-hop culture, my competition with Kanye West is what introduced it to mainstream America. Our battle took place in 2007, when Kanye's third album, Graduation, was due to come out a week after my third album, Curtis. When I saw that the dates were so close to each other, I realized we had a chance to do something special by turning our releases into a head-to-head competition. I pitched Kanye on the concept of us dropping on the same day. Being an independent thinker himself, Kanye saw the value in my vision and agreed to move his release date up. He understood we could collectively generate more buzz by hyping up our battle than being out on individual promo tours. The media loves a spectacle, and few things were more of a show than Kanye and me going head-to-head. We both played it for all it was worth, doing appearances together and adopting the role of two prize fighters before a big fight. To be clear, there was no actual beef between us. Kanye had never expressed any discomfort about the success I had, and I respected him as an artist. It was truly just a case of two people being comfortable with the concept of competing against each other. Personally, I knew competition was what I needed at that point in my career. I was in the most vulnerable state an artist can reach, confusion. So much had happened to me in such a short period of time that I had lost touch with my sense of self. Competition would help take me back to my roots. In order to regain that spark, I even moved back to my grandmother's house in Queens for a little bit, so I can soak up some of my old energy. Kanye was in a different point in his career at the time, but he took the competition just as seriously as I did. In the weeks leading up to the release, he locked himself away in the studio, redoing mixes and trying to make his album sound as tight as possible. He reportedly mixed Stronger over 50 times before he was finally satisfied. Neither of us were treating it like a stunt. Both of us was playing to win. In the end, Kanye took home the gold. It marked the first time two artists had moved over 600,000 units in the same week since 1991. Of course, he did beat me, But what the public couldn't see was that I did still earn a major victory. The truth was, by the time Curtis was ready to drop, Interscope was already starting to pull back from me. I was in agreement with them financially, as my first 2 albums had sold a combined 20 million albums. But despite that success, it was still to their discretion whether to continue spending marketing dollars on me. Despite all my success, they decided to slow down the cash flow. Even more damaging than holding back on the marketing dollars, they were undercutting my promotional strategy for the album. My plan had been to build up a street buzz with a song Straight to the Bank, which spoke to my core audience. Once that song was bubbling a bit, my idea was to release Amusement Park that had more of a pop feel. It was the same strategy I used when I released Wankster before In the Club. Get your core audience engaged first, and then drop something for a wider audience. Interscope should have supported my plan. It had worked in the past. But when Amusement Park did not hit #1 as fast as they expected, they started to second-guess the strategy. That threw off the energy I was trying to build. To make matters worse, when the record went to print, the whole album leaked prematurely. Those records should have came out after Curtis dropped, instead of in the weeks leading up to it. Once those leaks happened, I was in a bad spot. The public was none the wiser, but I knew Interscope had already severely damaged my launch. Thankfully, I knew just what to do. Instead of sitting around and moaning about my label, I took matters into my own hands. Just like I had 7 years earlier when Columbia was dropping the ball, I created a competition that would generate a buzz my label wasn't capable of creating. Even worse, I was competing against an artist whose label was doing everything, and I mean everything, to make sure he beat me. Jimmy Iovine might not have cared about beating Kanye, but Jay-Z, who was the head of Def Jam at the time, damn sure cared about beating me. Jay had been extremely uncomfortable with my run in NYC for years, so he did everything under the sun to make sure he could beat me through Kanye. I realized what I was up against in the week leading up to the release, when Kanye and I both agreed to do joint appearances on BET. I had planned to bring Eminem with me, but BET told Interscope we couldn't have guests. Interscope said fine and told him not to come. Then the day of the show, I get there and Jay's performing with Kanye. So clearly Jay had gone to some lengths to get around the no guest rule, whereas Interscope had just let it go. They simply weren't as motivated as Jay. Jay took a lot of pride in Kanye's victory. I think that's one of the reasons he's so disappointed in Kanye today. Jay knows how much he supported Kanye during that period, but it still wasn't enough for Kanye. That probably hurt Jay. Jay even mentioned my battle with Kanye in his book Decoded, taking a little shot at me when he wrote, "Rappers who use beef as a marketing plan might get some quick press, but they're missing the point." I congratulate Jay for doing the right thing by his artists in that situation, but I think he was the one who missed the point. First, like I mentioned, there was no actual beef in that particular competition. Second, without that competition, I have little doubt that due to Interscope's missteps, my sales would have been much lower. Our competition actually turned what would have been a tough first week for me into a very respectable one. If I had just left Interscope to their own devices, I might have only sold 400K that first week. Instead, I managed to salvage a tough situation and create a historic moment. As I later told an interviewer, Kanye West gets the trophies, 50 Cent gets the check. That's no shot at Kanye, he made a lot of money too, but it's a trade I'll take every time. Curtis Lannister. Sometimes, in the case of Curtis versus Graduation, you can create your own competition. Other times, the world will try to choose your opponent for you. When that happens, you need to be hustling at your smartest. Because when you should never run from competition, you do have to decide who your opponent is whenever possible. You can't allow yourself to get into a battle with someone just because that's what the media or fans want to see. You have to put yourself against the opponent who not only gives you the best chance of winning, but also leaves you in a more favorable position if you do end up losing. When Power first came out on Starz in 2014, it didn't seem to have any direct competition. Then Empire dropped on Fox in 2015, and suddenly everyone wanted to stack the two shows up against each other. On the surface, the comparison seems reasonable. Both shows were set in the world of hip-hop. Both had black casts and plots that revolved around strong female characters. Both featured soundtracks that were central to the energy of the show. Both shows had black executive producers. I understood why people wanted to pit us against each other. At first, I was happy to play into that perception. Fox was spending a lot more money on Empire than Starz was allocating for Power, so it was advantageous for me to tie into their marketing. I also noticed Fox trying to co-opt some of our narrative when putting out a promo that said empires are built on power. They even did a promo photo that was almost identical to one I did with G-Unit. That resulted in Taraji P. Henson and I having a fun little back and forth on social media. While I was comfortable manipulating Empire's early momentum, I didn't want to be associated too closely with the show long term. First of all, I was worried about being pitted against another show just because we both had a black cast. Second, despite the cultural overlap, I viewed Empire and Power as fundamentally different kinds of shows. Empire was on Fox, which meant it was free network programming. There was a limit to the type of content it could contain. Power was on Starz, which made it premium cable. And because of that, we were able to present a much more edgy and graphic package to our viewers. As I wrote on Instagram, Empire is some shit you should get for free. Now that Power is worth paying for. Starz, premium cable. Why would I compete against a free show on Fox when I was putting out a show on premium cable? If I was going to compete against a show, it had to be on the same playing field I occupied. So I took a look around and decided to go up against the biggest kid on the block. If you're going to compete, do it against the best. And there was no one better on premium cable at the time than HBO's Game of Thrones. So I made it a point to come for GOT time and time again. I wouldn't miss any opportunity to put Power in the same conversation as GOT. After someone superimposed my face on Tyrion Lannister's body, I went on the offensive on IG. This shit ain't nothing but hating-ass Game of Thrones fans sitting there with too much time on their hands, mad because Power is number one. Fuck you and your flying dragons. We on some real-life shit, ho. People ate it up. What I didn't mention was that the clever trickster was actually an artist I keep on payroll, precisely to create viral moments like that. People say I'm a bully, but I have zero problem poking fun at myself if it helps build buzz. An actual bully doesn't possess that sort of self-awareness. Their skin is way too thin to post those sorts of pictures of themselves. But I'm not moving off emotion. My skin is tough enough to do whatever it takes to keep my brand popping. Everything I posted concerning GOT was a calculated exercise to make sure that fans, foes, and media outlets knew that our intentions with Power never had anything to do with quietly succeeding. The critics might not have put Power in the same conversation as GOT, but I managed to steer the public conversation to put us side by side. The impact was substantial. HBO had a larger paid subscription base and a much, much bigger budget. But Power still managed to slay the dragon a few times in the ratings. Even better, since the fantasy series hit its finale in 2019, Power's viewership has been steadily outperforming anything else HBO is bringing to the table. I'm confident that our show's word of mouth is so reliable because of my expressed passion and support for the fans. Looking back, it's unlikely Power's reduced resources and smaller footprint were ever going to topple America's oldest paid subscription cable network. But that's how competition works. You can join a losing fight and still come out of it with something valuable. I mentioned I didn't want Power to be labeled as a black show. There's a good reason for that. The longest and most celebrated competition in America is black versus white. It's also one competition I choose to sit out. It's the one I know is rigged against me. It doesn't mean I'm not proud to be black or supportive of black artists. None of that. Power is, without question, at its core, a black show. I'm the executive producer. Courtney Kemp, a black woman, is the showrunner and writes the scripts. The stars are all POC, with the exception of Joseph Secure. The show has employed a lot of talented black people and people of color, as do all my TV shows. I still do not want it known as a black show. Basically, doing so would be to put it in a box, one that's almost impossible to break out of. It's what happened to me with Get Rich or Die Trying. Think about that movie. It starred me, a black man, and was about a rapper fighting his way to the top. It was directed by Jim Sheridan, a feisty little Irish dude who had helmed award-winning films like My Left Foot and In the Name of the Father. The score was by Quincy Jones, someone who has been able to connect with Americans on every level. The script was written by Terrence Winter, a writer and executive producer on The Sopranos and Boardwalk Empire. It was shot by Declan Quinn, an award-winning Irish cinematographer. In its bones, Get Rich or Die Trying was a mainstream movie, but that's not how Hollywood saw it. They saw it as a black film, and black films don't get to open in as many theaters as mainstream ones. This is why when Get Rich came out, it only opened in about 1,700 theaters. Now compare that to another movie about a rapper fighting his way to the top, 8 Mile. That movie had all the same elements as Get Rich, with the major difference being that Eminem was white. 8 Mile opened in about 3,200 theaters. That means 8 Mile had almost twice the opportunity in his first week at the box office as Get Rich did. I have zero beef with M over that situation, but I have big beef with the system that decides my film would only appeal to a black audience. The reason they gave me a movie deal in the first place wasn't because I was black. It was because I was a superstar. And the reason why I was a superstar was because tens of millions of white kids had bought my album. And the reason they bought my album was because they were fascinated with my life. So how does it stand to reason that a movie about my life would not appeal to those same white kids? There's no reason. It's an illogical system that prevents artists from being able to compete on a level playing field. So I try to stay off that field. I'm always going to hire black actors, black directors, and black showrunners. But I'm not blind to the realities that are still out there. When they made the poster for Power, I made sure Joe Shakur's character Tommy was on it, just as Russell Crowe was on the American Gangster poster, despite it being Denzel Washington's vehicle. My goal is to never be the best in one category or niche. My only goal for Power, as with everything I do, was to make it bigger and bigger and attract the widest audience possible. Don't keep your competition afloat. One of my imperfections is that I can enjoy competition too much. Sometimes I'll actually help my opponent by bringing them into my orbit longer than they deserve. There have been a lot of artists that I publicly beef with who have benefited more from those encounters than I did. They remind me of those parasitic organisms that live off a larger host. As long as they're attached to the host, they're okay. But as soon as the host moves away or they lose their grip, they die. That's how I view my relationship with artists like Ja Rule, Rick Ross, Jim Jones, French Montana, and the Lox. None of them came up with a long-term way to generate interest in themselves, outside of getting into a war of words with me. They've all tried to branch out into different endeavors, but their primary function is to sell records. And they know that saying something to me keeps their record-buying audience watching them. So they come at me. I understand why they do it. Everyone wants to stay relevant, but it's a flawed long-term plan. If all your shine comes from someone else's sun, what happens when that person moves away? Because once I get off them, it's like they don't even exist anymore. People will say, "Where's Rick Ross at? Did he fall off the planet?" That's what happened to all these guys. Once I shifted my focus to film and television development, it was like their careers hit that block of ice that sank the Titanic. Without me as a foil, they were sunk. Gianni Versace once said, "It is nice to have valid competition. It pushes you to do better." I agree with that. The problem is when you're engaged with inconsequential competition, there are no wins for the more established party in that sort of battle. What I need to work on is being more disciplined at not taking the bait. Just the other day, Rick Ross tried to lure me back into an engagement by saying I'm not relevant to the culture anymore. It was easy to see what he was trying to do. He's the one who was irrelevant, so he needed to re-engage me to get that relevancy back. I just pointed out that artists like him need to position themselves next to guys who have momentum and try to survive off that. Just pointing out what should be obvious. I shouldn't have even given his comments that much consideration. I got to do better at removing myself from competitions like that earlier. The longer I stay engaged, the longer they stay relevant. Why would I allow myself to be locked into a competition with guys like this? He's trying to sell records. I'm trying to sell TV shows and build networks. He wants to compete, but we're playing two totally different games. Sometimes the right move is to disengage with competition that's inconsequential. In other situations, you got to be very firm to establish your dominance. A lot of people wonder why I went so hard on Tierra Marie on social media when she was a seemingly inconsequential opponent. Well, let me explain what happened and why. Tierra, a one-time singer and reality TV star, sued me for allegedly conspiring with her ex-boyfriend to put their sex tape on social media. I never did that. A judge saw what she was up to and not only dismissed her case, but also ordered her to pay $30,000 to cover the legal expenses I incurred defending myself. In fact, as of today, the awards continued to increase. Tierra cried broke, and all across social media, people were calling on me to forgive her debt. "Oh, 50, she ain't got it," one person might say. "Oh, just let it go, cuz," another would write. "You don't need that 30 grand. Those people were missing the point, or multiple points. First off, I didn't tell her to pay me 30 grand, the law did. It's not for me to forgive the debt. Because people could identify with not having $30,000, the compassion was directed towards her, even though she was the one who had done the wrong. She also wouldn't be giving me anything. She was simply being told to put the money back in my pocket she had already wrongfully removed. Second, I had to send a strong message on how I responded to that particular situation. In my heart, I have no doubt the only reason she sued me in the first place was because I have a gigantic bullseye on my back. That's the reality in America. If your pockets are deep, someone will take a shot at you legally and see if they get lucky. So yes, I'm sorry she was broke, but I still plan to collect every last penny of the $30,000. Not because I needed it, but because I needed the larger public to understand that if you want to take a frivolous shot at me, you will pay for it. I'm not going to just shrug this sort of action off. I'm going to win, and then I'm going to collect. Speaking of collecting, I was trying to send a similar message with my Pay Me by Monday IG campaign. If how I handled Tierra Marie was a warning to the public, then Money by Monday was a warning to the people I knew directly. Don't try to borrow money from me and just forget about it. The message was received. Trust me, for as many people as I outed for owing me money, there were a lot more that I didn't put on blast. But after they saw me outing Randall Emmett and comedian Jackie Long, they made sure they got on a private payment plan quick. What's interesting is people didn't respond to me going after Randall the same way as when I went after Tierra. No, they loved that I had him so shook he was calling me Fafty in his text messages. They loved that he was begging me to take my foot off his neck. Why? Because everyone understands how it feels being owed money by someone disrespectful, especially someone who has the money and still chooses not to pay you back. That's something we can all relate to. No matter who you are, there's probably someone out there who owes you some cash but doesn't seem to be in any rush to pay you back. They might give you a hug and a smile every time they see you, and never even bring it up. Hell, they might even sit up in your house with their feet up on your coffee table and act like they don't have a debt in the world. Meanwhile, your head is about to explode from the disrespect. So when I put my foot down and say, "Screw that, I'd like to have that money back, please," that's a sentiment that almost everyone can support. Keep a book. At some point in your life, you might have owned a Lacoste shirt. You know, the ones with the alligator on the front. But you probably aren't familiar with the history of the company. Lacoste was founded in the 1930s by a French tennis player named René Lacoste. His nickname as a player was the Crocodile because he was so tenacious on the court. That's how the shirts got their insignia. Lacoste was an international tennis star by the time he launched his brand in the 30s. But only a decade or so earlier, he wasn't considered a top player. He was getting served, literally, by most of the players he was going up against. He decided he needed to come up with a new strategy to compete. He realized his best chance for an advantage would be to create a book on his opponents. Every time he went up against an opponent or observed one as a spectator, he would write an entry about the person in his book. He would list their strengths and their weaknesses. He would note their temperament and how they seemed to react to different scenarios. Lacoste's book became his secret weapon. In the era before TV and highlight clips, most tennis players were operating in the dark when they took to the court against new opponents. There was no way to know about someone's tactics or habits, their strengths or their vulnerabilities. Thanks to this book, Lacoste had a unique advantage for his matches. With his combination of knowledge and tenacity, he went on to become one of the best players of his generation, winning 24 titles, including Wimbledon and the French Open. Today, Lacoste's technique of creating a book on opponents is the norm in sports. Almost every team, from Pop Warner football to Major League Baseball, keeps a book on their opponents. We might call those books scouting reports today, but it's fundamentally the same concept. It's keeping a record of your opponent's strengths and weaknesses, so you can put that knowledge into practice if you ever meet them in competition. Books and scouting reports are now ubiquitous in sports, but they are barely utilized in other competitive situations. What proves to be effective in baseball and football could work just as well in film, television, fashion, marketing, etc. if applied the same way. I certainly keep a mental book on the individuals I consider my competition. I follow all the moves they make carefully. If someone does something I consider smart, I make a note of it and try to think of a way I could do something similar. If I see my competition do something I consider foolish, I make note of that too. And then I look for a way to leverage that vulnerability against them down the road. The key is that I remove emotion from the equation when I make my mental notes. I don't get jealous when I see someone make a smart move, just like I don't get excited when I see them stumble. I just make note of what happened and file it away for later. I do that with my hip-hop competition, but also in film and TV. I always watch successful producers like Shonda Rhimes, Dick Wolf, Tyler Perry, and Ryan Murphy. I note which writers they like to work with and what sort of material they like to focus on. I'll observe how they roll out new shows and identify the messaging that's effective, as well as what doesn't seem to hit. I'll study how they navigate their relationships with the various networks and how they create leverage for themselves. When I sit down at night and hit the power button on my remote control, I am not watching as a casual fan. I'm studying each show the way Rene Lacoste studied tennis players back in the day, or the way an NFL scout watches his team's opponent for the following week. That's the level of commitment that's required to separate yourself from your competition. If you want to be a writer, you have to take notes on every author you read. If you want to be a chef, every time you eat a meal at a restaurant, you have to be thinking about how your competition works, with flavor, texture, presentation, and ingredients. If you want to be an ad executive, you just can't walk past a poster on a subway platform. You have to study every poster, supermarket, sales display, and bus wrap that you see, and make note of what catches your attention and what doesn't hold your eye. Don't complain that it takes the fun out of eating at a restaurant or watching a mindless TV show at the end of a long day. If you're truly passionate about your dream, you'll want to analyze as many TV shows as possible, or visit as many cutting-edge restaurants as possible. When you're hustling at your hardest, you're going to observe and engage in anything that gives you the slightest advantage. I keep my notes in my mind, but a powerful exercise is physically writing a book on your competition. If someone in your company has a senior position you'd like to occupy, write down the book on them. Try to identify what constructive things they do every day that has them in that position. Do they come in earlier than you do? Do they have a better relationship with the boss? Are they more outgoing? Do they have a tendency to get ahead on issues? Are they confident in presentation? Faster to respond to emails? Anything you think they do well, write it down. Then take note of their weaknesses. Do they tend to overpromise? Do they like to leave early at night? Do they trust their underlings to do too much of their work for them? Play a little fast and loose with their expense account? Get caught up in inter-office relationships that they probably shouldn't? Write all those down too, and then study that list. In it, you have the information for improving your performance, as well as the information that will reveal the most opportune places for you to strike when you're ready to make your move on that job. Whenever you write something down, it promotes a more focused way of thinking. When ideas only live in your mind, it's easy to lose track of them. Even if they're extremely powerful, they get lost in a stream of new information that's constantly entering your head. You can have an incredible idea of how to earn yourself a promotion, but it can get dislodged by the thought of what you might get for dinner. Then that idea that has promise gets swept back into the piles and piles of ideas that we all have crowding our consciousness. Maybe you'll get back to that great one, or maybe you won't. Writing those ideas down protects you against those ideas getting lost. Once it's on paper or your computer file, it's there forever, staring you back in the face whenever you look at it. Whether or not you act on it, it's still on you, but at least you won't forget it. Once you have it down on paper, you're setting yourself up to make something valuable happen.